How your shadow reveals your life's purpose. Face your shadow, find yourself, depth mind. What if the part of yourself you fear the most is actually your greatest source of power? Carl Jung called it the shadow, the version of you you've pushed away, denied, or buried beneath the mask you wear for the world. But it hasn't disappeared. It shows up in your triggers, in your jealousy, in your anxiety, in every moment you overreact and don't know why. This video isn't about perfection. It's about honesty. It's about what happens when you stop trying to be good and start becoming whole. You'll learn how your darkness isn't your enemy, but a messenger, a guide. And if you dare to face it, you might find the very parts of you you've spent a lifetime running from. The question isn't, how do I get rid of my shadow? It's, am I ready to listen to what it's been trying to say? Let's begin. When deep-seated fear becomes the inner compass, have you ever wondered why the things that scare you seem to haunt you the most? Why a recurring dream, a vague sense of unease, or a seemingly ordinary situation can leave you confused, breathless, or even avoiding yourself entirely? Carl Jung once said, "The shadow is not just what we hate within us, it is also where we find what we most need in order to become whole." Jung did not see fear as an obstacle. He saw it as a map, a guiding system leading to the forgotten parts of our soul. Every time fear arises, instead of pushing it away, he invites us to look deeper. What within you is speaking? We are often taught to be strong, to stay positive, to overcome. But overcoming fear is not the same as ignoring it. In fact, the more we avoid fear, the more we spiral into internal chaos. What is repressed doesn't disappear, it slips into the unconscious, where it becomes a shadow silently controlling our actions, emotions, and decisions. Some people fear failure, yet never dare to try. Others fear abandonment, so they cling to relationships that have long since rotted. Some fear being seen, so they build a perfect persona empty on the inside. Jung called these fears invitations from the shadow, the place where unhealed wounds lie, but also the beginning of truth, power, and purpose. You may ask, where do I begin? Begin by observing what scares you the most. Write it down, sit with it. Like you would an old friend. Don't judge, don't try to fix it. Just listen. You may find that behind the fear of failure lies a deep longing to live authentically. Behind the fear of being hurt is the desire to be loved properly. Behind your anger is the inner child, who was once abandoned and unprotected. When you dare to walk into these dark places, they no longer control you, they become part of your awakening journey. This is not an easy path, but it is an honest one, because fear, when truly listened to, will guide you back to the deepest part of yourself, and that is where the meaning of life begins. The forgotten shadow, what we don't dare admit is ours. There are parts of you that linger quietly, yet always leave you feeling uneasy. It might be the envy you deny, the outburst of anger you regret, or the brief jealousy when someone else succeeds. These feelings do not appear randomly. They are signals from the shadow you've long forgotten. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the inner darkness made up of traits we reject because we believe they are bad, unacceptable, or incompatible with the image we want to show the world. Ironically, the parts we refuse to acknowledge often contain untapped power and unhealed memories that form the core of who we really are. As children, we learn to behave in ways that earned love. If expressing anger led to punishment, we learned to suppress it. If showing confidence was labeled as arrogance, we learned to shrink ourselves over time. These cut-off parts didn't vanish, they sank into the subconscious and became our shadow, and what it is buried long enough eventually erupts unexpectedly and destructively. Have you ever met someone who triggered an intense reaction in you? Someone so confident they irritated you? Someone so needy they made you impatient? It's likely they were reflecting the shadow part of you that you've denied. The discomfort didn't come from them. It came from within. The issue is, society teaches us to be good, to behave properly, to maintain control, but no one teaches us how to face the forbidden parts of our psyche. So we grow up living with half of ourselves edited out, living like a polished version designed solely for approval. Jung once said, You don't become whole by becoming perfect, but by confronting your shadow. Wholeness comes not from living with only the parts we like, but from embracing everything, even the hard to accept parts. So what's the first step? Observe the emotions you typically avoid. Envy, shame, anger, feelings of failure. Don't dismiss them. Instead, ask, if I saw this feeling as part of me, what would it teach me? Because only when we name what we once rejected can we stop it from silently controlling us. Remember, the shadow is not your enemy. It's the missing piece waiting for your recognition. And only when you realize you don't have to be perfect to be worthy of love can you begin to live as your whole, liberated self. What we judge in others is often what we avoid in ourselves. Have you ever felt deeply irritated by someone, even though they didn't do anything obviously wrong? Have you ever overreacted to a small gesture as if it stirred something unresolved inside you? Carl Jung called this projection, a psychological phenomenon where we project the unacknowledged parts of ourselves onto others. When someone angers you, they may not be wrong. They might simply be reflecting a part of yourself you've denied. A person who is too confident. Perhaps you were once taught that expressing yourself is arrogant. A person who's overly needy. Maybe you've grown up never allowing yourself to ask for help. We hate in others what we haven't yet admitted existed in ourselves. Jung once said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. This simple sentence can shatter even the most elaborate inner defenses because it forces us to confront a hard truth. Our anger, contempt, or jealousy may not be caused by the other person, but by an unhealed wound inside us. And that is the paradox of psychological growth. When you hate someone intensely, you might be standing at the threshold of deep self-understanding, but instead of stepping through, we turn away. Instead of facing our inner shadow, we blame the other person for disturbing us. Judgment is a mirror, but few dare to look into it because what it reflects is not someone else's flaw, but our own abandoned self, a part longing to be seen and reconciled. When you find yourself judging too quickly or too harshly, pause and ask, what part of myself am I refusing to accept? This is not easy. Owning your shadow demands ruthless honesty. It forces you to shed the kind, composed role you've played for so long. But only through this honesty can real transformation begin. We don't face the shadow to become worse. We face it to understand why it formed in the first place, and why we once needed it to survive. In every judgment, there is a past version of ourselves. In every reaction, a wound unnamed. If you truly wish to heal and be free, start by observing the people who provoke the strongest reactions in you, because they're holding the mirror reflecting precisely the part of yourself you've forgotten. And who knows, when you're brave enough to look, you might just rediscover a long-lost piece of your own soul. The journey toward wholeness, not to be perfect, but to truly be yourself. We live in an era obsessed with perfection. Social media drives people to present only the best, the most successful, the happiest versions of themselves. We learn to hide sadness, disguise pain, and only show the good side of who we are, but in the process, we forget one truth. A human being doesn't need to be perfect, they need to be whole. Carl Jung called the path back to our true self-individuation, the process of becoming who we truly are. It's when you dare to face the hidden parts of your unconscious, to reclaim the aspects of yourself that society, family, or even you have rejected, not to become someone else, but to become fully, clearly, and freely yourself. Wholeness doesn't mean always controlling your emotions, never making mistakes, or never falling down. Wholeness means you are willing to acknowledge those emotions, anger, envy, fear, as part of who you are. You no longer fear their arrival because you understand they are not your enemy, but the voice of the parts of yourself that have never been heard. We've been conditioned to split ourselves into two zones. The good parts we keep, the bad parts we reject. But this only pushes us further from our authentic nature. The more a person tries to be perfect, the more they fall into self-judgment, anxiety, and lose the sense of what it means to be truly alive. Meanwhile, those who embrace their shadow are often the ones who stand firm in life because they no longer fear exposure. Individuation is the journey of pulling all the broken pieces, light and shadow, back into one, not to become better than others, but to stop living someone else's script. It is the process of shedding the masks, persona that society taught us to wear, and returning to the self, the deepest, most original essence of who we are. You may ask, is that easy? The answer is no, but it's worth it. Because once you become whole, you no longer need others' approval to feel worthy. You won't need to prove yourself to be loved, and you will stop resenting the different parts of yourself, because you'll know that they are exactly what make you unique. We don't need to be perfect copies of an ideal. We need to return to ourselves, honest, contradictory, layered, and deeply human as we were always meant to be. And in that wholeness, you will finally feel something that perfection chasers may never know, the peace that comes from within. The shadow grows in denial and fades when. It is heard we're often taught that if we ignore the negative, avoid old wounds, and pretend to be okay, everything will eventually be fine. But according to Carl Jung, it's the very parts of ourselves we reject, the pieces we don't want to acknowledge, the emotions we pushed aside that give the shadow its power. The shadow self is not born out of nowhere. It's formed in moments when we were hurt and left misunderstood, from times when we suppressed anger, swallowed tears, forced ourselves to be strong, to move on. And with each of those moments, a piece of our real self was tucked away into the dark. At first, the shadow whispers a vague frustration, a sadness you can't quite name, but the more it's ignored, the stronger it becomes. It surfaces in random outbursts, jealousy, and exaggerated reactions. That's the shadow speaking, not to destroy, but to be seen. We fear the shadow because we think it's bad. But in truth, the shadow only becomes dangerous when it's isolated, when we refuse to face part of ourselves. That part will appear through others via projection. We become judgmental, quick to anger, unable to forgive, and we can't understand why we keep encountering the same painful situations. It's not a coincidence. It's the shadow calling us home. Carl Jung once said, "We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." In other words, we become free when we dare to listen to our darkness, when we face the discomfort within. Facing the shadow doesn't mean acting on it. It's the first step toward healing, when you can say, I too have parts that are angry, selfish, fragile, and I no longer deny them. Only when acknowledged does the shadow stop needing to scream for its place in your psyche. A person who dares to meet their shadow becomes capable of genuine love, because they don't just love what's beautiful, they also love the cracks within themselves and others. They are no longer ruled by unconscious emotions, but act from a conscious heart. And so, the shadow once feared becomes a companion, not something to escape, but a deep, essential part of yourself that longs to be understood. Because inner maturity doesn't come from rejecting who you are, it comes from being willing to see all of it clearly. Carl Jung saw this early on. He believed that purpose is not something to be found, but something to be recognized. It doesn't live out there, it lives within. It doesn't come from relentless striving, but from deep self-understanding and the courage to live in alignment with who you truly are. Have you ever felt an unexplained emptiness? Even when life looks fine from the outside, a hollow feeling that can't be filled by awards, money, or affection. That's not a lack, it's your soul signaling that it's time to return home, back to where everything began, inside yourself. Jung called this process individuation. It's not about becoming better than you are now, but about removing the mask so you can finally meet the person you were always meant to be. It's not about changing yourself to fit the world, but embracing yourself deeply enough to live truthfully within it. But living truthfully takes courage to reject expectations that aren't yours. Courage to acknowledge dreams buried long ago because they weren't realistic. Courage to say no to anything that pulls you away from your essence, no matter how comfortable, convenient, or praised it may be. One of the most common mistakes is to confuse ourselves with roles. I am a good child. I am a model employee. I am the perfect partner. But you are not your role. You are the one who writes the script. And when you live too long in a role, by the time the curtain falls, you realize you've never really lived. The meaning of life isn't found in chasing a grand ideal, but in pausing to ask, what inside me has been forgotten? What do I truly long for? And the answer usually doesn't come from the mind. It comes from listening to your shadow, listening to your fears, listening to the quietest voice inside you that you've been trying to silence because it doesn't match who you think you should be. When you live in truth, not to meet others' expectations, but to honor your inner calling, meaning is no longer a question. It becomes a state of being a deep inner sense that I am where I need to be at the right time, in the right way, and no one else can give you that except yourself. But how do you access what is unseen? How do you reach a part of your mind that you are not even aware of? The answer is through the language of the unconscious. The unconscious does not speak in words. It speaks through images, emotions, intuition, visceral reactions, and especially through things that make you feel uncomfortable for no clear reason. It may appear in dreams, in the form of someone you dislike instantly, in behaviors you can't control, or in emotions that arise unexpectedly and leave you ashamed afterward. Jung believed that one of the most powerful ways to connect with the unconscious is through inner journaling, not the kind of journaling that recounts your day, but the kind where you sit and converse with yourself, write down unexplained emotions, write as if you're talking to a part deep within maybe a wounded inner child, a rejected self, or a buried dream. Another tool is dream analysis. In dreams, the unconscious speaks. While the rational mind sleeps, Jung kept meticulous dream journals for years and regarded them as a map to the true self. Start by recording your dreams upon waking, no need to interpret them immediately. Just write, then observe recurring symbols or images and ask yourself, what part of me does this represent? Another important method is active imagination, where you close your eyes, enter a mental space, and allow inner images to arise naturally. No control, no judgment, just observe and follow. Many people, through this process, encounter inner figures representing fear, anger, abandonment, and by meeting them, they are no longer ruled by them in daily life. You should also pay attention to your emotional reactions in relationships. When someone triggers strong anger, jealousy, or hurt, ask, is this emotion about them or about a part of me that's been touched? This isn't about blame, it's a sign. The unconscious is offering you a clue. However, dialogue with the unconscious is not always comfortable. There are images, memories, and emotions that may make you want to turn away, but as Jung said, we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And when you dare to listen to that darkness instead of suppressing it, something remarkable happens. You begin to heal, not by erasing the past, but by embracing it as part of who you are. You don't need to defeat the shadow. You only need to let it speak. Because sometimes what you call weakness, chaos, or irrationality is simply the voice of your deepest self trying to find its way back to you. And if you are brave enough to listen, it will lead you home to your truest self. When you don't understand yourself, you unconsciously damage what matters most. Have you ever wondered why a seemingly good relationship falls apart? Why you keep repeating cycles in love, family, or work, even when you genuinely want to do better? The answer doesn't lie with others. It lies in the part of yourself you've never come to understand. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." In relationships, that unconscious part is the shadow wounds that haven't healed, unspoken expectations, fears of abandonment, betrayal, of not being seen. And if you don't recognize them, they will quietly dictate how you love, how you react, and even how you walk away. Do you get angry over small things? It might stem from feeling disrespected since childhood. Do you cling to someone you know is unhealthy? You could be reenacting an old wound of abandonment. Do you distance yourself from people who care, maybe deep down you don't believe you're worthy of love? None of this is your fault. It's a sign. Your unconscious isn't reacting to the present. It's reacting to a past that hasn't yet healed. And unless you see it, you'll live as if the world is constantly betraying you, hurting you, leaving you, when in truth, it is your old wounds calling the shots. Shadow work is not just a solitary endeavor. It is most clearly reflected in the face of the other. The intense emotions you feel, love or hate, are fragments of yourself crying out to be seen. Jung believed that relationships are the most vivid stage where the shadow plays out. When you begin to observe instead of react, you'll realize something profound. The other person is not trying to hurt you. They are unintentionally touching a part of you that you haven't been ready to face. From that awareness, something miraculous can happen. Conflict becomes material for healing. Instead of asking, why are they like this? Ask, what is my reaction saying about me? And in that question lies a doorway, not just to self-understanding, but to more resilient and authentic relationships. Because when you truly understand yourself, you will know how to protect what matters, when to release what no longer serves, and how to love without trying to control, how to be close without losing yourself. Understanding yourself, in the end, is the greatest gift you can offer to any relationship. Not to be perfect, but to be present fully, honestly, and wholly. The creative power within. When you transform chaos into inspiration, there is a paradox few people realize. The chaos within you, the repressed emotions, denied thoughts, unresolved conflicts, is also where your greatest creative force resides. Carl Jung likened the inner shadow not only to a container of our negative traits, but also to a vault of untapped potential. This includes talents, passions, intuitions, sensitivities, all the things that were once labeled too much, too strange, or not appropriate by the world around you. When someone disconnects from their inner shadow, they not only lose a chance to heal, they lose access to a part of their creative soul. Imagine an artist once mocked for being too sensitive now listens to their pain and paints images that touch others deeply. A writer who once buried their rage now channels it into stories that shift collective awareness. A person once told to stay silent now dares to speak their truth, not to rebel, but to liberate. All of this power stems from a single point: the courage to enter your own chaos. The shadow is not something to hide. It's raw material. Like fire, it can destroy or illuminate, depending on whether you know how to transform it. And that transformation doesn't come through denial or suppression, but through connection, listening, and dialogue. Jung believed that integrating the shadow doesn't just make you better adjusted. It makes you strong and creatively alive. When you stop trying to become who society expects and begin exploring who you truly are, with both light and dark, you tap into a source of inspiration that no one can replicate. The very wounds that nearly broke you, when illuminated and understood, can become the most unique materials for your art. Because no one creates like someone who's walked through chaos and kept their flame alive. So don't hide your rage, your confusion, your unrest. Dive into it. Ask what it wants to say, where it wants to take you. Perhaps that very place, the one you were once ashamed of, is where your truest voice resides. A voice that can create, heal, and inspire the world through your story. The transformation of an individual, a beacon for the surrounding community. We often forget that an individual's inner journey, though silent and unassuming, can create ripples that extend to an entire community. Carl Jung believed that when a person embarks on the process of individuation, becoming whole within themselves, the change doesn't stop with them. It begins to touch those around them, invisibly yet profoundly. Someone who dares to face their inner fears, confront their shadow, and learn to embrace it emits a distinct energy, the energy of authenticity, a quiet yet steadfast presence, a kind of peace that doesn't need words, but everyone can feel. Have you ever met someone like that? Someone who doesn't try to impress, doesn't need to appear special, yet makes you want to listen, live more genuinely, and understand yourself more deeply. It's not because they convince you, but because they've connected with their own essence. And when someone connects with their essence, they awaken that potential in others. That's why the healing journey is never selfish. When you become honest with your emotions, when you learn to love even the imperfect parts of yourself, you unintentionally create a safe space for others to do the same. No judgment, no pressure, just presence, a mirror reflecting inner courage. A child can grow up differently when living with adults who admit mistakes and are honest. A friend may learn to forgive themselves when they see you forgiving yourself. A community can begin to transform when there are individuals deep enough to talk about the shadow without fear. Jung once said, "No one can become whole if they live only for themselves." He didn't mean sacrifice or martyrdom. He meant that the individual and the collective are inseparable. Each time you overcome a pain, an inner knot, you're clearing the path for others to move forward. The transformation of one person, even if silent, can be a guiding light for many others struggling in their own darkness. Because true light doesn't need to be dazzling, it just needs to be real. And sometimes, a small inner spark from you is what makes someone pause and think, if they can do it, maybe I can too. That's how a person, without becoming a hero, without seeking praise, can contribute to healing the world simply by living authentically, deeply, and with enough courage to start from within, turning pain into wisdom and life into a journey of awakening. None of us go through life without carrying some wounds. Some have been betrayed. Some grew up lacking emotional support. Some always feel they're not good enough, no matter how hard they try. These pains, if not understood and transformed, become burdens we carry daily, invisible yet heavy. Carl Jung didn't deny pain, on the contrary. He looked straight at it and said, "Unresolved pain will repeat in the dark." According to Jung, beneath each wound lies an unopened lesson, a psychological piece that, if we're brave enough to face, reveals a forgotten part of ourselves. Have you ever wondered, why do these events happen to me? Why do these hurts repeat in relationships, work, emotions? Perhaps it's not fate's punishment, but life's invitation for you to pause and look within. This is when pain begins to turn into wisdom. Wisdom doesn't come from learning a lot or reading deeply. Wisdom comes when you have enough stillness to look at painful experiences without running away, rationalizing, or blaming, simply witnessing, as if you're sitting with the wounded child inside you, listening without needing to fix. In that state, something strange happens. You begin to realize the pain that once seemed to break you is where empathy resides. The times you fell are where you learned humility, and the parts of you once rejected weakness, anger, fear, turn out to be doors leading you to wholeness. Life, if seen through fearful eyes, will always be a series of challenges to overcome. But if seen through awakened eyes, it's a journey to awaken each part of your soul that's been asleep. When you turn pain into wisdom, you not only heal yourself, you become a support for others. Because only those who've been through the dark can truly guide others out of it, not with advice, but with presence. That's why those who've been deeply hurt, if not consumed by darkness, often possess a special kind of wisdom, gentle, profound, unhurried. They no longer try to change others or save the world. They just live authentically, with compassion, with awareness, and that's already a significant light. Life, after all, isn't about conquering everything. It's about understanding yourself, bit by bit, through each pain, each overcoming, each time you learn to stop judging. And when that happens, you no longer ask, "Why did this happen to me?" but smile and say, "Thank you, because through this I've seen my true self." Not an ending, but a doorway to a deeper version of yourself. Most of us believe that finding ourselves is a journey with a clear beginning and end, that there will come a moment of enlightenment, a perfect milestone at which we can declare, "I have become my true self." But the truth, as Carl Jung repeatedly emphasized, is completely different. The journey of becoming oneself is not a destination to reach, but a living, ongoing, and infinite process. Your courage to face your shadow, your fears, anger, jealousy, pain does not make you awakened. It simply opens the first door, and behind that door is not eternal light, but deeper layers of your being, versions of you that have never been allowed to exist. When you uncover a hidden part of yourself, it not only transforms you, it turns you into a mirror for others. Your journey isn't purely personal. It becomes a collective one, where every step you take leaves a trail for those still wandering in the same darkness you once encountered. And here's the paradox. Just when you think you've arrived, a new layer unfolds. An old wound you thought had healed reemerges. A part of you that you believed was resolved comes back, but this time you don't panic, because now you understand this isn't back to square one. This is a new version of you, deeper, more authentic, and closer to your core essence. Jung once said, "The ego cannot become the self without venturing into the world of darkness." But once you've entered, you begin to realize It is precisely in the breaking that you start to rebuild your true being, no longer relying on others' definitions, no longer living to conform to any system, but living in full alignment with your inner truth. And at that point, the idea of an ending, the ultimate happiness, the perfect image no longer matters. You begin to find joy in the process of discovery itself. You learn to love your imperfections, not because they disappear, but because they become parts of yourself that you no longer wish to hide. You stop searching for validation from the outside instead. You begin to offer yourself inner affirmation, that you are living truthfully, that you are brave enough to be honest, that you have not turned away from your darkness. And because of that, you now begin to understand what true light is. So if you find yourself in a place that feels like an ending, know this: it may just be the beginning of a deeper, more awakened, and more meaningful version of you. There is no need to be perfect, no need to arrive. You only need to continue authentically, compassionately, and with the light that shines from within. Self-acceptance, the first step toward rooted healing. Throughout the journey of self-discovery, many begin with the ambition to change themselves. We want to become better, stronger, wiser. Yet few realize that the very first and most important step toward healing is not change, but self-acceptance. Carl Jung never called on us to become people without shadows. On the contrary, he believed that only when we dare to face, touch, and accept the parts of ourselves we've been ashamed of, avoided, or even hated can we truly begin the process of individuation. Self-acceptance is not surrender, nor is it indifference. It's a very specific mental state, one where you can clearly see the cracks within yourself and no longer hide from or condemn them. It's the moment you stop demanding that you must be right to deserve love, and instead begin to learn how to love yourself, scars and all. Think back to a time when you failed, lost your temper, or acted wrongly. What caused the deepest pain wasn't just the action, it was the prolonged self-judgment that followed. You called yourself weak, unworthy, a failure. You lived in silent punishment for years. And that, more than the act itself, is what disconnected you from your inner being. Jung once said, "I'm not interested in what you do. I want to know if you have the courage to fail." This statement underscores a powerful truth. We are not healed by becoming perfect, but by knowing that we are still worthy of love, even in our wounded state. Self-acceptance is also the foundation of compassion. When you stop hating yourself, you become less harsh toward others. You begin to understand that everyone is struggling with their own inner shadow, and no one needs another judgment. The world is not lacking in critics, but it deeply lacks people who understand, embrace, and accept. And from that foundation, healing begins not through forcing yourself to be better, but by listening to yourself with rare gentleness. The deepest wounds don't heal through advice. They need a safe space simply to exist. And self-acceptance creates that very space. So, if you find yourself somewhere along the path of transformation, don't forget this seemingly small thing. Begin by accepting yourself, both the parts you love and the parts you fear. When you stop abandoning yourself, you will no longer feel abandoned by the world. You don't need to be perfect to begin healing. You only need to be honest with yourself. And whisper gently, "I may not be complete yet, but I am worthy of love, of peace, and of a meaningful life, starting from exactly where I stand." When you no longer fear the darkness, it becomes your companion on the path to selfhood. At the end of this journey, we face one of the most important and most liberating truths. Darkness is not the enemy, it is the guide. From an early age, we were taught to avoid the bad, to flee the dark, to hide anything imperfect, but that very act has allowed darkness to grow unchecked in our unconscious, becoming something that haunts and manipulates us from the shadows. We strive to appear strong, virtuous, positive, but inside, we're haunted by the question, what if someone discovers the darkness within me? Carl Jung not only illuminated the structure of the unconscious, he gave us a path, individuation, the journey toward wholeness, through facing, understanding, and integrating the shadow into our being. This is the profound turning point. Instead of fighting the bad parts, we begin to dialogue with them. Instead of banishing them to the depths of our soul, we invite them to sit at the table of the inner self, to listen, to ask, to learn. Because the shadow is where your most authentic parts have been buried. desires, rejected emotions, suppressed power, unexpressed creativity. And when you stop fearing it, you realize it is not dangerous. It is sad. It is lonely. It is simply waiting to be heard. And in that moment, when you face it without judgment, it no longer controls you from the dark. It becomes part of the light you carry. You'll begin to notice the fear that once made you shrink becomes the motivation to open up. The anger that once destroyed becomes the strength to protect what matters. The sadness that once buried you becomes fertile ground for compassion. At that point, you are no longer afraid of yourself, nor are you afraid of others seeing your real self. Because you know the real you may be imperfect, but it is whole. You begin walking through life with a new gaze, not trying to escape yourself, but to return to yourself, no longer running, but walking alongside, no longer divided, but unified. And in that sacred turning point, the shadow becomes your companion, not your obstacle. It no longer leads you to the abyss, but deep into yourself, where you find your most authentic, powerful, and compassionate self. You don't need to defeat your shadow to live a meaningful life. You simply need to walk with it with awareness and love in your heart. And if you can do that, you are not only healing yourself, you are quietly lighting up part of this world with the wholeness you carry within.